as John Neff says, jargonoidal, then it's the jargonoidal meadow is the field. It's the agricultural meadow, yes. And then I started to think about Shadi coming, and what appeared to me was a Wallace Stevens poem called Of Mere Being, which some of you might know. It's a shorty. I think it's like about as long as a limerick, but it's not a limerick. But I'm going to read Of Mere Being, which it starts with a palm, which we can maybe picture growing out of the meadow near the field, near the mountain. The palm at the end of the mind, beyond the last thought, rises in the bronze decor. A gold-feathered bird sings in the palm without human meaning, without human feeling, a foreign song. You know then that it is not the reason that makes us happy or unhappy. The bird sings, its feathers shine. The palm stands on the edge of space. The wind moves slowly in the branches. The bird's fire-fangled feathers dangle down. Whenever I'm sad, the bird's fire-fangled feathers really make me happy. So I'm really excited to have Shadi Harouni visiting us, in part for personal reason. This was a choice that I did not make, which makes it even more fun, because I had met Shadi in 2016, right before I left New York, at this group that we now both are, can't remember the name of it, but we both kind of think of it as the like leftist art group at NYU that Andrew arranged. And so we were, in one of these art situations, and as you guys probably know, you just decide maybe people that you like or would like to pursue a friendship with, or maybe a collaboration. And I really like Shadi, and I like talking with her and joking with her, and we had a good time. And then I moved to Chicago, so I was like, oh, there goes, that. So it was really fun to be like, to look at the list and be like, oh, great, Shadi's coming. So I'm really excited that she's here, and that you guys all get to have studio visits with her and the colloquium tomorrow, and I'm really excited about this talk. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the jargonoidal, about Shadi, and then she'll give her talk. So Shadi Harouni is clinical assistant professor and director of undergraduate studies in studio art at NYU Steinhardt Department of Art and Art Professions. I love NYU's titles and names for things. I used to teach there. They just go on and on. It's the Department of Art and Art Professions, Harouni's practice in visual art ranges from site-specific interventions and sculptures to printmaking, photography, and film. Her work considers the metaphysics of hope, alive and contested bodies, forbidden objects, and forgotten spaces. Yeah, that's what made me think of the palm at the end of the mind. They follow the subtle and intricate ways in which power attempts to erase and abolish, and the kinds of ingenuity and strategy individuals employ to resist erasure. Her research is centered on disavowed and marginalized histories of dissent and resistance, chiefly in the Middle East. Harouni's projects have been exhibited at the Queen's Museum, Kunstmuseum Bonn, Prague City Gallery, Doris McCarthy Gallery, University of Toronto, Fondazione Ratti, Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts, Centro per l'Arte Contemporanea Pecci. Her work has been featured in Art Forum, The New York Times, The Guardian, among other publications. She's been awarded a Gattuso Prize for Outstanding Exhibition, a Harper Foundation Grant for Artists, and she's held residencies at Civitella Ranieri, Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, where you were also director or something, right? She was also director of Skowhegan. Soma in Mexico City, Lower East Side Print Shop, or LES Print Shop, New York, Artist Research Laboratory in Como. Harouni holds an MFA in Studio Art from NYU. Oh, so you doubled up. And a BA in Fine Arts from the University of Southern California. Join me in welcoming Shadi Harouni.
thank you. I'm going to just adjust because much, much shorter. Do we like this? Okay. I'm going to try to kind of stay. Someone tell me when it's too long, because I have a feeling that there will be some kind of wedding party coming in to this space, so I don't want to get them too late. I want to thank you so much. Thank you for being here, for getting me here, to all the faculty, all the staff that did a great deal, and everyone that I'm going to speak with. I have to say that I really, the low-res program has a special place in my heart, and I've really admired it from afar for many years. So I'm very happy to be here and to get to learn a little more. And gone but not forgotten, I want to thank Greg Bordowitz for inviting me to come. Right? We like him still, right? Yeah. And Dushko. Yeah, that will work for me. I am going to share 3 projects, recent projects. As Dushko mentioned, all of these projects kind of take various forms, and often they take several years to develop. So I say 3. I have no idea if that is the correct number. I just think it may comfort you in some form, but they all meld into each other, as we will see. And I want to start with the opening of a recent film, which I'll kind of divide into pieces. It is called The Owls Made a Nest in the Ruins of the Heart. The film was made in Iran, in my native region of Kurdistan. And again, like many of my projects, it's the product of years of collecting stories that come together to begin to maybe weave unwritten histories of political dissent, of possibilities of connecting these seemingly insignificant, quiet, often personal acts of resistance to global mass movements and, dare I say, revolutions. So the film is one in a series of works that tell the largely untold story of leftist revolutionaries, Marxist revolutionaries in Iran, who have dedicated their lives or portions of their lives to fighting for justice and freedom. They have spent their youth in the 70s and 80s as political prisoners, lost their professions as teachers and writers and lawyers, and were forced into hiding or forced into work in isolated, very harsh spaces of labor. Don't mind the cow for now. We'll get back to her later. Just go with it. The title of the film is borrowed from a little-known Kurdish folk poem, one of many that's murmured in the Harouni mountains and amongst its diaspora that are scattered across the globe. The Harouni mountains are sacred and significant to the Kurdish people, who have been divided by imposed nation-state borders that run through Iran and Iraq and Turkey and Syria. And so many of us in the diaspora see ourselves as always standing with our face to the Harouni mountains. In the opening to the film, you'll hear the voice of someone that I will call Y. For reasons that become clearer, I cannot yet speak his name, but would hope to be able to do that in the near future. He's an old dissident. He's from my neighboring village, and we have been collaborating and working together for the past 8 years. The booth is they're wonderful at knowing that we're going to dim the lights, but we're gonna wait just 1 second. So you'll hear Y's voice that is set against the magnificent, glorious body of our moo cow. So now we'll lower the lights, but do not be alarmed. They will come back up soon. We have a smaller projector, we want to see you. So know how to do this.
من تقریبا 12 سالگی دور بودم. میخواستم بیام برم دبیرستان، راه افتادیم از همین ده. این بابام برادم خب همسایه ما بود. می آمدیم قروه. از ده ما تا قروه 6 کیلومتره. تو راه از من پرسید خب کجا میخوای بری؟ گفتم که میرم درس بخونم، میرم تهران. گفت تهران کجاست؟ گفتم پایتخت. گفت پایتخت کجاست؟ گفت مثلا چجور میری؟ گفتیم اینجا سوار میشیم میریم همدان. همدان سوار ماشین میشیم میریم تهران. والا چقدر راهه؟ گفتیم مثلا 10 ساعت. گفت که به نظر من نری خیلی بهتره، بدبخت میشی. دستش اینجوری دایره‌ای کرد و اینا. گفت این 3-4 تا ده من رفتم، یه ده هم پشت کوه یه بار رفتم، این قربم چند دفعه آمدم، من دیگه جای دیگه ای نرفتم. الانم بهتره اینه که با هم بیای شهر و اونجا قند و چایی بخریم و با هم برگردیم، چون تو این میری اینجا و اینا حتما بدبخت میشی. گفتیم نه بابا ما میخوایم بریم درس بخونیم فلان، چرا بدبخت میشیم؟ گفت خودت میدونی، ولی من میگم بدبخت میشیم. ولی حرفش هم درست شد، ما بدبخت شدیم. حوادث بعدی همش نشون داد که درست میگه دیگه. من تقریبا
My work in many ways is rooted in exile and exodus, and both the possibility and impossibility of return. So like why I've been away from home from a very young age, and I'm forever split, like many of you, between two geographies, two realities. And though I've lived in the US and in New York for a long time, in my work, in my thinking, I would say also in my teaching, I'm consistently working against this idea of geographical, historical, linguistic hegemonies. So for me, much like Baba Murad, his village is just as much the center of the world as is New York City. And I feel, I'm just going to say this and put it out there, that my stubborn insistence in continuing to work and exist in a region of the world from which I've been officially erased, all relatives and later myself forced into exile, our mother tongue eradicated, our family homes left in ruins or confiscated, and our identities and history almost entirely disavowed. But for me, this insistence is a political position and perhaps, let's say, some form of resistance, and one that comes with a price as well. So I think because my own identity is contested, my work is centered on the hope and the possibility that exist in contested identities, contested bodies, contested geographies, and of course, disavowed histories. So a little viewing I thought might be nice to have. Here I am with my family. They look so happy on the beach. This is my mother, father, brother, and that's a 1-year-old me. I was born into an 8-year war in very unique historical circumstances in a small city in western Iran to a Kurdish and Jewish, albeit very secular family. And even as a young child, I was keenly aware that I had inherited both contemporary and ancient histories of resistance. My father was, for a time, a professional revolutionary. My mother was, for a time, a sociologist of revolution. And they both paid a very heavy price for who they were and the work that they did, including many years spent in prison. So again, you may notice that we're particularly miserable in this photograph of us on the Caspian coast. Now it's almost like the archetype of a good refugee family. And because my family lived in Western Iran, in Hamadan, where during the war, Iraqi airstrikes were particularly common, we often fled to other parts of the country, like the Caspian, even though, ironically, bombardments seem to have followed us everywhere. My mother's inscription, I know it's difficult to see, on the back marks the date, which is winter of 1987, and the place of this refuge vacation, which maybe is something that we can talk more about later, along with two words that in Farsi read as end of the bombardments. So for me, it's unclear what she's referring to here, because in fact, the Iraqi airstrikes continued well into the following year. And I think perhaps maybe it was the false promise of the two governments, which is not uncommon during wars, or her own hope or need to believe that a ceasefire was imminent. The Iraqi war, which lasted nearly 8 years, came to an end more than a year after this photo was taken on August 20th, 1988. For me, what is significant in this artifact is the idea that history is not only marked by official events that are recorded, but by declarations of hope, declarations of the promise of new worlds, of possibilities. So I think what I think about, especially at this moment in my life and in my practice, is this idea that the promise of peace, the promise of freedom, of utopia, of revolution, even when that promise is broken, which it often is, it's not lost, that everything around us is somehow imbued with that promise, and that as artists, we can hold and mold and re-engage that promise through our work. So my work as an artist has been to search for images, for places, for objects, for sentient subjects, human and animals and plants, that are imbued with the promise of resistance, of revolution, of exodus. So over the years, this search has taken me and my collaborators to some far off, sometimes uncomfortable places. It has, for example, taken me to abandoned factories, which I went to for years, spaces that hold dreams of industrialization, of self-determination, buildings whose foundations and walls literally hold hopes and ideas in the form of books and pamphlets and typewriters, which I spent many years trying to unearth. Histories of labor, of production, and hope and failure all entangled in these spaces. The search also took me for many years to struggling, isolated mountain quarries, again, spaces of labor and extraction. For a period of 4 years, I traveled to these isolated quarries throughout the Kurdish region, trying to, I kind of went there on a hunch. I had this feeling, I'd heard rumors, I had stories that told me that I would be able to unearth stories of dissidents who had taken refuge into these spaces because they were barred from the kind of work that they would have done in cities. And so I was trying to kind of engage with the histories and mythologies that were embedded in the folds of the mountains and in the stone themselves. So The Lightest of Stone is the name of the film, the first film that I made when I went into the stone quarries. I arrived there at the height of ISIS's assault on humanity, just across the border, and it was also the height of economic sanctions that were imposed on Iran. So I was coming into a space where labor and the products of labor had been really rendered valueless on many levels. and there was a great tension. So as soon as I kind of stepped into these spaces, although they were isolated, because they were isolated, the workers, anyone who was there, was constantly watching satellite television showing ISIS. And so, and also no one had gotten paid in a long time, and extraction continued, but it really didn't make sense why it continued. And also I came across people, none of whom belonged there, that every person that was there was somehow displaced. And so, they too had been pushed into these mountains as a result of immense economic and political pressures. And so when I first went there, I immediately understood that I had to experience time and narrative and especially productivity in a new way. And so for me, the task wasn't how to do anything there as an artist, but it was what kind of labor could I undertake so that the layers of history and mythology and the politics of representation and distribution that clearly was embedded in this space could maybe somehow, for a brief moment, come to the surface. So let's watch just a few minutes of this film.
نیفتی خانم انجام بیاد رو سره واضح باش این برم میتونی داری برید سنگام دارم آقا نیست بشه واضح دستاتم باش زبرا
جواب دیگه ما داشت به سابقه جواب نیم تو دادم بس بجو بان بس حسن باید نیده اصلا شوقی بود نیده تا ایوانه فقط یه را کار میده یه خود دادیم منصف بیایی ندیم هندسه اما شایی من عجب السلام علیکم خدمت شایی نه خدمت شایی سبه بکرد آبادادی دیوی زیر خاک پنهان کرد
خاکی جان وقت منی
علی بیارم علی اونم من شادی تو بده موردی کار کنم من شد
کاش یه دیگه شوی چیش تو بهت هم
شو گرم بکنید
نه تنی تکرم بکنید
همه چی جای دیده بچه که ایز نازدید برای نو نه؟ Ano, önce ben de biz kayıp şu bakma şeyine tezini de. Sen de anlıyor bir şey var. Başımı daldı. Ciddi mi? Vay. Zaman yere fui kuliya. Ne kuliya? Ağır burşanesi. Yani bir kolayı, nasıl kolayı? Açılış damızda o yaşlı bir sabah diye falan da kadar. Sağ olun, kumara geç. Bu açık. Aynen, orayı püskürdüğüm ben külahınlara koyarım. Var o dönüm zavvade değil. Hadi haklasayla öğretim olmadı. Ya var nezer çek böyle bir avyuma desteği.
Ben hiç nezeri nedim kıyvana diye.
Redbeş o şeyle bir bak. Bezeden değil. Züblayım da o. Hadi bana şu de ne var çeşte ha? Bana ne var zaten. Aynen.
Allah'ımı sen kimlerden bir baktı.
Senin hanım öpmüş. Film tutan adam bir tane.
Neden kadınlar var sağlananımızda habir kumak.
Filmeyi درباره چیز بود یعنی مثل دادن من نمیزن ایشون سناریو بود که از جنوب نظام او از شاه از جنوب شیر فرهاد نبید از جنوب نظام بید شیر فرهاد در شاید تمیشه اسپر میگه که درنگرد باید چیکار بکرد باید برای چه دعویانی خطری بکرد تمیشه اسپر میگه که برای دعویانی خطری کرد da Kur'an ne yapmışlar? Ben gelin alalım. Şu barda bakalım. Bekleyeceğim. Yana bak. Şöyle. Ya ana fi Oakland Amerika buraya. Ya da ben bana bunu daha şu şey bunu daha şu. Ama bunu daha şu seçim. Ona bu kaşkı izledik ha. Ne kaçık ayıcı kadın. Böyle man kan ha. Evet, su benim ona gidiyor. Ödüz mü daha?
Ne yapıyor? میترسم
بعد
The second chapter, I've been told very kindly and gently that you can't hear me at all in the back. Is this good? Thank you. Just yell at me if you don't, please. I beg of you. It's very important stuff I'm saying. It took several years of very careful engagement and coming and going and learning and determining for myself how to bring a camera into what I believed was a space of hiding, how to tell a story that hasn't been told, how to negotiate the desire to speak, to show, to put on an exhibition as an artist with, again, the need to maintain privacy and allow what is hidden to remain hidden. And also how to take histories and language that is dormant, not quite dead, but just dormant, just beneath the surface, and bring it back to light. What I understood immediately, which is something that I think now is central to my practice and my teaching, is that I can't just drag what is hidden into the light. I have to create the conditions for it to be able to move back and forth between the realm of the visible and the unseen. And so for me, the quarry was, and I suppose will be, both a hiding place and a monument to the stories of the individuals that I got to work with, to their hope. Very nice. Thank you. Going back to this idea of the monument with a voice that's actually present in the room, I was thinking about how to make a monument to both kind of the failure and the endurance of these individuals and these movements. And I have to say that I think there is no monument to history so fitting as a mountain that's being reduced one stone at a time. And so we will watch just a small fragment of the second chapter of this film. We will hear the voice of M, who was a teacher, who was imprisoned and then released by the revolution, but never allowed to work as a teacher again. And so he has lived his life in spaces such as this, in this quarry, in oil fields in the south of Iran, in South Korea, and he has been to all of these places, kind of still holding on to who he is and his ideals. So we'll start a little bit with him.
من از همون کودکی به خاطر حس عدالت خواهی که در درون خودم احساس می کردم به طور طبیعی و غریزی و ذاتی کشیده شدیم به این راه که در جهت عدالت کاری بکنیم، تحقق عدالت در جامعه، در بین خانواده و جامعه بشری. انسان چون ذاتاً طرفدار دوستدار عدالت و شادی و آزادیه و در این راه انسان باید تلاش بکنه، مبارزه بکنه. بهاش خیلی سنگینه. بهای سنگین، هم از نظر مادی و هم از نظر معنوی، و با ارزش‌ترین چیزی که انسان داره فراتر از همه مواهب عمرشه. وقتی انسان عمرشو در راه عدالت صرف میکنه اون بزرگترین بها رو داده. ما وقتی در جریان انقلاب اومدیم بیرون خیلی ظاهراً با استقبال گرم مردم روبرو شدیم و دعوت به کار شدیم. شرایط مساعد بود برای ما که در راه کسب صندلی پست و مقام و اینا پیش بریم که ما اون راه انتخاب نکردیم. هنوز در اول راه بودیم. شرایط یواش یواش داشت عوض میشد به طرف تغییر، آزادی خواهی و عدالت خواهی. خیلی چون شرایط عوض شد، شرایط عینی و ذهنی در حال تغییر بود برای عوض شدن و تغییر، ولی به سمت چی؟ به سمت بهتر شدن، عدالت و آزادی. نه از چاله به چاه، از چاله در بیای بیفتی تو چاه.
It took a lot for M, who continues to be very afraid of the government and what they might do to him and his family, who are nearby, but he mainly has to live away from them, to speak in this way. And when we did this work together, I asked him in the work, what is it that you desire at this moment? And you know, he said, I still long for a good game of football on the grass. And so we didn't have the grass. Of course, it was, you know, important for us to play as we did. And because we have machinery, we could create a field at the heart of this poor mountain. And so maybe just very quickly, I share a moment from this next chapter.
چشم حالا ای صادقی و رضا و امیدن نه امیدن بسته کمال ای صادقی فاسی بقى بیا رضا بیا کمال
علی بگو
جمشیده گل نرده؟
هیچ و هیچ
هیچی؟
عشقت نباسی همین بیاد گل کن
عزیزی امید؟
خوشبال دیدیم دیان الان میزد
خوب جمع کن
شدی
فیلن گرمیم ها
I learned that I don't know how to run, and that I shall never make this kind of work again, but I've been working on it. I also learned that this incredible, magnificent
بیایم بیرون ما بریم بیایم تو
was a brilliant player, but also a terrible cheat and a sore loser too. And so I learned the importance of play and humor and this sense of laughter and the kind of the need for humor to be so ingrained in any form of both survival and resistance against all of this political pressure. And so I began to really bring that into my work in ways that is very difficult and not always possible, but I started to kind of search again, as I said earlier, for these again very private, almost insignificant forms of dissent and resistance that are rooted in humor and are rooted in a kind of refusal of what has been said. So this work also really extended to my sculptural practice, to my work in with text, with objects, and again, with histories. Many of these pieces have long texts that serve as titles and that maybe bring other forms of language into our world. So I will read, although I know you are reading as well. Rezaniq was a shoemaker in Hamadan, where I was born. A few days after the revolution, he changed the name of his little shop to Mossadegh, the name of the first elected prime minister of Iran, deposed in a CIA coup. And I would say very much the symbol of hope for new futures and possibilities. He installed a neon sign with the name, 4 connected letters that in Farsi, from right to left, read as MSDQ, no vowels. In a month or so, the new authorities ordered him to change the name. He had the first letter taken out, and now the shop was named Cedr, which means truth. After a few years, the light in the S went out too. His shop's new name was Degh, which means death by heartbreak. He let this new title stand. What I'm trying to do is to look down this thin line between accidental, intentional acts of dissent and to trace them from personal refusal to, again, mass movements. For me, these forms, these stories serve as monuments, but it's the makeshift monument that I'm interested in. And I'm looking for forms that can operate like a good political joke, where there is a moment of possible recognition between the speaker and the receiver. This idea that one isn't alone, that someone else recognizes the absurdity of the system, that someone else feels the hard, bitter reality of betrayed promises. I'm constantly looking for forms that resist erasure, like the light that this way continues to flicker, even when it is ordered to die. And as you may have noticed, my research process involves a lot of standing around and listening and digging and maybe sometimes reading. And so through this process, I collect stories, accounts of how power attempts to erase, and the kind of ingenuity, the kind of humor, the kind of even absurd ways that individuals or groups kind of figure out for themselves how to resist this kind of erasure. And I think for this reason, a lot of what I do is either an attempt to flatten or to give body to that which has been reduced to surface. I think this is perhaps why I'm attracted to printmaking. I like this idea of kind of these surfaces that are pressed together. It really feels like something that belongs to this world, as if forms have been paved over and some kind of imprint is left behind. This is a complicated series of large-scale monoprints or text, which I hate talking about, but I don't know, it's here. So the work is called An Index of Undesirable Elements. With each image, there's an accompanying text that's silkscreen onto the frame. And each text is an account of bodies, of monuments whose existence and histories are contested in absurd, excessive ways. And the narratives I'm working with span from, say, modern leftist movements to ancient transgressions in mysticism, in poetry, and philosophy. I'll share one story to lead us into the next thing. When they began to execute the enemies of religion, the leftist or the atheist or even the Islamist who strayed from the official path, the hardliners faced the problem of where to bury the bodies. In the beginning, the bodies were buried in the main cemetery of the city, but the pious claimed that the infidels threatened the peace of their martyr souls. So a fatwa was passed, and in my city, Rasht, where the infidel had died in strong numbers, the authorities received a permit to remove the undesirable elements to a far corner, away from the others. A grave here, a grave there was dug up and pushed to the corner, little inconspicuous empty spots, except for where the 3 Ahmadi brothers and 2 of their cousins had been buried next to one another, all killed on the same night in the same prison. There was then a large empty hole. At night, it was rumored someone had brought in a little monument and placed it there. In a few days, the authorities removed it. No one had taken a picture. No one seemed to know what it looked like or who had placed it there. In each one of these texts, there is a longing for some kind of photographic documentation, for some proof to allow these histories to exist. And then every once in a while, I do have photographic documentation. Here, photos, graves of dissidents who were executed and properly buried by the executing regime, but mysteriously paved over by the new regime weeks after the 1979 revolution of Iran. In the past 40 years, the stones have been forcing their way out of the pavement, and they continue to rise. There are 20 photographs in total, perhaps the most, let's say, dangerous, perilous work I've ever done. I actually deeply hate looking at this work and try to never revisit. And it's not just because the subject matter is personal and painful, but because I'm somehow never certain if the narrative, as I have just presented it, is true. You know, there's such obstinate, abstract, even benign forms that I think, how can there be more underneath? I'm often certain I've made up the story. And while I have a very good relationship with fiction, this uncertainty, this going back and forth is very unsettling to me. But then when I look closer, there are also signs, bit of stone peering from under the cement here, leftist slogans and symbols visible here and there. And then there's the flowers. Families still place flowers on these amorphous cement blobs. I don't know if they know where they are and who's beneath them. These cemeteries are spaces of vigilant surveillance, and to look through a lens at what has been erased presents a threat to those who aim to control the past so that they can control the present and our futures. Just steps from those graves in the cemetery, there are photographs. You can easily photograph these small shrines. These are images that I've culled from my archives. There's a painful gap between accounts of young bodies in unacknowledged, shallow mass graves and the photographs of other enshrined martyrs and their reliquaries. They are official, they are erect, they are protected, and still they are sites of both forgetting and despair. And so after years of living with these forms and working with these forms, I began making my own reliquaries, all in brass, as a dwelling place for the spirits and the images and ideas that I had been working with. Each of these structures brings together distinct elements to make a new, what I think, architectural whole. So here, flowers lifted from a young man's grave and cast in brass. On the left, 12th century designs for playful vessels for wine. Casts of photographs hanging in the shrines on the right. Cast velvet curtains taken from a temple. On the right, hands of a Zoroastrian priest carved into an interior wall. On the left, A for fire. Architectonic elements modeled on photographs of early public housing projects in Tehran. Here is one in the south of Tehran being inspected by the Shah, the King of Iran, in 1961. Here is another in Naziabad with all its hopes and promises of comfort and security for the poor and the working classes. And at the bottom left, 3 little words in Farsi that read, bread, housing, freedom. It's a largely forgotten slogan and, of course, demand of many social movements toward justice and equality. I don't really know what these sculptures are, but they provide a way for me to think about places where we dwell, about how the living and the dead are housed, and about the home as a site of desires and political possibilities. At the same time, I've been thinking about home and considering home and homeland outside the bounds of private property and nation states. So I turned to this book. It's a children's Kurdish language alphabet primer called Alphabet. It was written by M. Amin Bozarslan. The book was published in Turkey in 1968, and then it was immediately banned, and its writer arrested and put on trial and charges of separatism. It is the only children's alphabet book whose writer has been put on trial and in prison. So this work, Khane Khane Khane, is a hanging something, embroidery on velvet, and the text and iconography is borrowed from Alphabet, the book. And the word Khane in Kurdish means house, home, a dwelling place. And so what is it to say there's no place like home 3 times, where home is a forbidden concept, a banned word in an outlawed language? And so when I started to really think about how to bring together years of storytelling that I had experienced and recorded together with Y, whose voice you heard at the beginning of this presentation, and we'll hear again in a moment, it was the house that became the single arresting image that I felt could hold all these stories. So I finally left the mountains for the home. This was to the delight of the group of people that I collaborate with. The mountains were harsh. And the focus of the film, too, became home, became the many places that Y has lived, from the village house to the prison to other spaces. Housing and the housing crisis, that's a symbol of the broken promises of so many governments around the world, somehow became the center of this work. Many years ago, Y had told me this story about a house that he lived in while he was working at a nearby quarry, work he had taken so that he could be out of the public eye and less likely to be taken back to prison or executed, although many tried. Still, he was well aware that every day when he would leave the house to go to the quarry, that agents would come and they would search the home, trying to find something that would get him in trouble one way or another. So as an act of veiled protest, he starts to leave the door wide open, place a rock, leave it open to say, I got nothing that you can take from me. And so one day, a cow, seeing that the door was wide open and the shade and the greenery to her liking, and all conditions right, walks in, and he comes home to find her taking a nice little nap in the living room. And so this simple image stayed with me, partly because I wanted to work with the domestic space, partly because the significance of the cow in world cinema. For me, the cow never left the house and became a part of the absurd human drama that has played out all around her throughout the years. So let us watch a little bit from kind of the middle of the film. As you remember, he has a louder voice.
نان مسکن آزادی این شعار همین جماعت چپ بود. حالا همه چپ ها سر این قضیه توافق داشتن. این شعار مال کمون پاریس هم بوده، مال انقلاب روسیه هم بوده، چون این سه تا آدم با این سه تا زندگی میکنه. نان مسکن آزادی. ما عدالت میخواستیم، اولش پیشرفت میخواستیم، عدالت میخواستیم، یه حکومت قانونی تر میخواستیم، آزادی احزاب میخواستیم، آزادی انجمن میخواستیم، آزادی فکر میخواستیم، همه اینا رو میخواستیم. هیچ کدامش هم نشد. ما 2 ماه انفرادی بودیم، بعد 2 ماه بازجویی تموم شد، بردن یه جایی بهش میگفتن قرنطینه، چون اون بند سیاسی ها جا نبود. همون در واقع این استبلای قاجار و پهلوی بود، زندان قصر. اونا رو کرده بودن زندان. اون اتاق هم اتاقای اسبا بود، کرده بودن اتاق. بعد همینجوری زندانی می آوردن، خیلی زیاد. هی زندانی آوردن، هی زندانی زیاد کردن. دیگه فراموش کردن ما را ببرن. همونجا موندیم. بعد اینجا آفتاب اصلا نداشت به طور کلی. یه حیاط کوچیک 10-15 متری داشت، اونم ظرف توش می شستن. از روزی که جیم کارتر آمد، این بازرسای سازمان ملل می آمدن، صلیب سرخ می آمدن، بازرسای شاهنشاهی می آمدن، دونه دونه از ما می پرسیدن شما را شکنجه کردن نکردن، تا اینکه سازمان مللی ها می آمدن. مردم انگلیسی هم بلد نبودن، یه سرا می گفتن تورچر. بعد اگر جام تنگ بود تو اتاقا، دستور میدادن اینا رو باید برین زندان دیگه. میگفتن هر زندانی به 18 متر مکعب فضا نیاز داره. اتاقا رو زردر میکردن و گفتن نه، این پس این 2 تا زیادی هم ببرین یه جای دیگه. تعدادی رو برداشتن بردن زندان قزلسار. از 3200 نفر در سرتاسر ایران 1200 نفر آزاد کردن. ما آخرین گروه بودیم که آزادمون کردن، سال 57. ولی شاه هنوز نرفته بود. ساعت 8 شب آمدن گفتن هر کی میخواد بره بیاد بره. ماشینم حاضر کردیم، همبندی های ما گفتن زشته و فلان و بزنیم فردا بریم. ما ساعت 5 صبح آمدیم بیرون، دیدیم آقا یک لشکر عظیم جلو زندان وایستاد. خلاصه جلو ما رو گرفتن و ما رو ماچ بکنن و گفتیم بابا ما قهرمان نیستیم، 3 نفری قهرمانا تو الان میان، اونا رو ماچ کنید. توی ده وقتی آمدن استقبالم، از تمام دهات اطراف اینقدر مردم ریختن توی این ده، دیگه چیزی نمونده بود اون خونه های اطراف ما فرو بریزه پایین. خونه پدری من مثل موجودات افسانه‌ای بود، بالاش انسان بود، پایینش حیوان بود. من گفتم الان همشون انسان ها، خونه خراب میشه، اینا میفتن روی این حیوان ها. خیلی خیلی سخت بود. 4 سال گذشته بود، حرف زدن ما مردم نمیشنیدن. تو زندان ما عادت کرده بودیم یواش حرف بزنیم، بلد نبودیم بلند حرف بزنیم، تا عادت کردیم بلند حرف بزنیم و اینا خیلی طول کشید. تا 12 شب هی می آمدن میگفتن شکنجت کردن، زدن. خب براشون هم عجیب بود، چون اولین کسایی بودیم که ما رفته بودیم زندان سال 54 53، کسی جرئت نمی‌کرد از این کارا بکنه. دیگه براشون خیلی عجیب بود کسی با رژیم پهلوی شوخی بکنه، اصلا غیر ممکن بود. کسی جرأتش نداشت. اگر ما کاری میکردیم خیلی مخفیانه بود، ما هیچ کار علنی جرأت نداشتیم بکنیم. یه عده بودن بچه بودن و نوجوان بودن و اینا فکر میکردن ما قهرمانی، ولی ما برای همشون توضیح دادم نه ما قهرمان نیستیم و این یه اتفاق بدیه که افتاده. میگفتن بابا ترسیدی؟ نه ترس دیگه، شاه ارزه نداره دیگه، شاه داره میره فلان. ما گفتیم بابا شاه خوبه، برین به همین بچسبین، اون یکی که داره میاد بیچارتون میکنه.
I had made one kind of work, and then nearly a year ago, the women in Iran went and had themselves a revolution, and so the work became something else, and I had to do something else too. So up to this point, I had been kind of collecting and just waiting for stories and accounts that were so kind of obscured and hidden to either reveal themselves or to allow me to kind of bring them into the light. And suddenly, thanks to technology, thanks to social media, and to the incredible bravery of the people of Iran, and we were flooded daily with images of resistance, of revolution, of a movement. And so my work became more than anything this kind of meticulous and frantic archiving of images that circulated and disappeared often quickly. So I'll share a few of these with you. A young girl runs about her backyard, screaming the slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom," in its original language, that is Kurdish. And here, the camera breaks the very strict divide between the safety of the home, which has surely incubated this kind of revolutionary joy, and the violent surveillance of the public space. This night, the streets, the walls, the uncovered hair, again the presence of the camera, and the word resistance continues. Are revisited, censored, broken, and built again. And new kinds of heroes emerge. Here is Shadi, mother of Kurdish activist Rami Hussein Panahi, who was executed by the Islamic Republic in 2018. Here she is, also in her country, facing the camera, setting the news on fire in protest against execution. Not for her son, but for all the children of the land. And this is why she is known as Shadi, mother of all. And there are others, like Khodanud Lejei, killed by the regime forces on October 2nd, 2022. His extraordinary dancing, his just beauty alone is such a great affront to the Islamic Republic and has made him a beloved symbol of this revolution. And so when I reluctantly agreed to do a public art project for a number of cities, starting with these massive wall panels on the river embankment in Prague, I thought only of paying tribute to the aesthetic, corporeal, intellectual work that is the struggle for freedom from oppression in Iran, and while acknowledging the wall of safety through which we would be viewing the work. So this is a series of photographs. Here, my own hands this time extend out of the wall to hold a cinder block, which is, of course, used in protests to block off streets, with words that are culled from my archive of writings on the wall. The text is in someone else's handwriting, and it reads, "The body revolts." Here, straight stencil that reads, "Ham gham, ham qiyam," sorrow and uprising both. It's a hell of a practice to hold these two things together. Here, a very low-resolution photograph of a hand in a moving car, shot through with hundreds of tiny pellets, still holding a sign for victory. And here, a facsimile of a photograph of a sticker on a shop window in Tehran with the silhouette of Vida Movahid. Here is Vida. She took off the white scarf she wore in accordance with the strict mandate of the Islamic government. She tied the scarf to a stick and began to wave it as a flag over the heads of the crowd. Some stared in awe, others went about their business. She was arrested on the same day and sentenced to 3 years in prison. And finally, of course, drawing from my massive archive of images of mothers holding the photographs of their children, is this stencil of Daya Sharife forever holding the photograph of her son, who now holds a sign that reads the Kurdish slogan, "Resistance is life." And so I want to end, and I know probably the wedding wants to get in, but by taking us back to the house with just a moment to allow us to kind of finish the film together. These are the last minute of the film.
من رفته بودم زندان، این مادر من فکر کردم مثلا به این پرنده ها و اینا خدمت کنه، من اعدام نمی کنن، من زنده میمونم. به کفترها و جغدا و کلاغا و به همه اینا غذا میداده. اونا همه عادت کرده بودن عصر میشد میادن میریختن تو حیاط. من 2 تا جغدم لونه براشون درست کرده بود، تا اونجا زندگی میکردن. تا این آخران بودن، یعنی تا روزی که زنده بودن همونجا بودن. حالا من که نبودم، مادرم هم که دیگه نبود، اونا بودن. مادرم میگفت جغد علامت ویرانیه، بی خود میگن جغد علامت آبادانیه. هر جا برن زندگی کنن اونجا آباد میشه. این خونه هم بالاخره آباد میشه دوباره.
And that's us finishing with words of another mother. Thank you, thank you. We have a little time. I imagine we're very strict. Happy to do no questions. All right, fine.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering, from sitting here from a Western perspective, there were 5 gentlemen, and I don't know about your crew, and you were engaged in the archaeology of the rocks, and I'm wondering, it seemed like maybe the documentation itself was a form of safety, but I'm just wondering how you felt safe and you were a visitor.
You know, in those cases, especially in the mountains and the factories, I was often the first woman, the only woman who had ever stepped into these places. I'm assuming ancient times were different. But I think the thing that was important for me was to really show this possibility of men and women working together. These are a bit older films, of working together, of playing together. I definitely felt extremely safe, but not only that, but felt that there was so much space, and this is Kurdistan, mind you. This is kind of space of possibility, something that they have worked on for a very long time and through many horrors. But yeah, I mean, that's why the play part was so important for me, because it really signaled this ease. In fact, it was a question for me because at that time I asked everyone that was there if you should make these films with my hair covered or not. Not covered meant that this work could not be shown in Iran. I mean, in general, this work could not be shown in Iran, but definitely not while this regime persists. And it was everyone's opinion, unanimous. No, we're not doing scarves here. What is this shit? So I think that kind of eased this kind of concern, like, you might hurt yourself, but like, you got this, was really important for me. Also, I really learned that teasing is such a fantastic, wonderful kind of key to intimacy and to collaboration. So I think the teasing too, I kind of, as soon as I saw it, I was like, we got to get some of this. This is fantastic. So yes, but I think that also in the last few years things changed for me. I think that work was very much, in many ways, about my presence as kind of the sole female presence in that space. And then I began to really miss the female voice as well. And really had to kind of shift the projects so that the more recent projects sort of bring that in. And that's certainly a result of woman life freedom and the way that it has changed also my perception.
Hello, my name is Kia. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really beautiful in so many ways. I had a question about some of the film, particularly, I think maybe it was the second clip that you showed where you are digging and uncovering, and there's that group that's with you that's having the just amazing dialogue. I was just really interested to know more about, like, how did you set up that shot in terms of, did you place everybody in the shot? How did you choose these folks to be either collaborators or like a part of this? Because I just found it just so interesting. It was just really interesting to me. So I'm just wondering how you created that image and were able to just capture just so beautifully, like, this moment of this conversation between them interacting with, you interacting with the space.
I have to say that it took some time to make that work. So we spent kind of days, as they say in the film, these guys have been here, they're working. And what we really did was establish this idea that we're working and you're working. And anything that we filmed was filmed with workers, was filmed during their break. So at the end of this film, actually at the end of all of them, they say, okay, now break is over. So kind of time is really dictated by the rhythms of their life and work there. Because we were working so hard, there was a kind of empathy that developed over, like, what is this artwork that's not exactly for pay, much like the thing that we do? And again, it was a very tense place and people were very depressed. And I had come in with the perfect crew because they were very depressed. So we had a photographer who was so depressed he didn't take a single photo. We had a poet, a dear friend, who was on suicide watch, and that's really why he was with us. And his job was to really kind of explain the various things we're all interested in, like mythology, like labor, like Jennifer Lopez, and how she is seen and how we might be seen elsewhere. So through a lot of conversation, they're giving me a gift. They have heard us speak, and we have kind of determined together, these are some points that we're going to bring about. The shot is also very much, one of the men really chose, the one who's really into like the load here and the load there, and he chose the wall for us. He felt that was the right wall. And we really kind of placed, and the idea was you can move about, but they were so committed by the time that we began to make this work, which is really the 15 minutes of the film. By the time we kind of set the thing up, everyone was so committed. They're like, no one's moving. We got to get this, and we got to get this right. We're not messing around. So it's really a gift that's given. And I think in general, when you work with with storytellers, with people who become really invested in your work, the results are quite remarkable sometimes, not always. For example, with this film, you know, I said to why, I was like, I finally figured it out. I want to do this. I think it's time, even though he was very reluctant for many, many years. And I think I want to go back to the story of the cow. And he said, listen, Shadi, we'll do the talking, we'll do the recording, we'll figure out the house, I'll help you with the cow. I don't know how that makes art, but let's see. You know, so I think this kind of skepticism, which we all have as artists as we go into any project, coupled with a kind of investment that develops usually over years, that can do something. And Dushko, you're going to cut us off when needed, right? Okay. I'm okay. I just don't want, I want you guys to party.
Was there someone up there?
Hello. I see how you struggled to talk closely to the microphone. It's jarring. Yes. Okay. So thank you for your talk. I had a question about how you think about your audience. You seem quite tight with the people, or grow to become close to the people you collaborate with locally, and you've shown in some really cool places. It seems like mostly in European and North American context, and I was wondering how you thought about how you think about audience when you're making your work or looking back at the footage and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. It's so difficult to answer, so I'll just kind of answer partially, and then we'll see what comes out. I think that there are various kind of levels of thinking about the audience. One is, you make the work imagining that no one will give a shit. That is my first, and often that is the case, I think, for example, America has been American-centric for a very long time, and there's something in artists are the ones to say, like, okay, well, we're not, or we cannot be, but often you make things and no one really cares. My favorite thing to hear after a really good meeting, maybe with a curator, I mean, we'll do it here, we can say these things here, is when they say, this is really important work. I was like, yes, you won't support it. I get it, it's good, I like it. So that is a political position to hold, and you hold that. On the other hand, I spent a lot of my engagement with language, with titles, for example, is about creating context with the fewest number of moves you can take. So, okay, so I refuse not to bring this language that exists in the world into this world, right? But then it's very important to me that it's understood, that there's explanation, but not in the way of an explanation, but as the work itself, somehow rooted in the work. So I'm very hyper-aware of my viewer, how long they might want to sit on a chair. I believe in boredom, and I think it's very important to stretch things out, because I'm also working in spaces of boredom, working with boredom. And with boredom as a space of possibility. But at the same time, I really want to consider how to develop a kind of understanding. And more than understanding, it's context, because especially when you work with history, you have to kind of lay out some context. Yeah, I don't know. I don't always know. But thank you for the question. Think about that.
So I take the mic.
If you're around. come back. Then, yes, hi.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for your work. I'm absolutely mesmerized by it. I'm Irina. I have probably a very heavy question, but I'm very curious. How do you relate to the word revolution? How do you? I don't want to say define it, but yeah, the possibility of revolution, or just how do you name it?
Again, I think for me, revolution is not necessarily an event alone, and it's not only a process. It's something that, as I said before, it's something that lingers, and we can allow ourselves to be imbued by it. I think from a personal historical experience, it is deeply frightening. And as a human being, as an artist, kind of looking into that kind of horror is something that really appeals to me. But to look into it not in order to show, once again, how horrific it can be, but to really allow it to linger with us and to be a part of our everyday, as opposed to something that kind of happens and that we avoid or we run toward. At the same time, you know, I work with history, and history is marked by revolution, so I can't avoid it in any way. So it's a very horrifying, dear, dear friend of mine.
Why is it horrifying? You explain a little bit why is it horrifying, and then I won't ask any more questions.
In almost all of my films, there is this moment, and kind of in this presentation, I ended two of them with this statement of immense hope, and this process of digging yourself out of a hole in order to plummet into a much deeper one. Or with why when he says, to the absolute shock and awe of the neighbors who have gathered to celebrate his release from prison and the revolution that he has helped to bring about. And he says, no, go hold on to the last regime, go hold on to the last guy, because this new one that's coming up will really fuck you up. And so that horror, I think, has to be held. And it's really very significant. And again, with joy, like the child who runs around.
And my question has to do with a little bit with that. Can you talk a little bit about your thinking about the concept of domestic space as sites of resistance and revolution?
I think I didn't go, yes, it's true, I didn't go kind of deep enough into that. It's also part of very kind of current thinking for me. But something that's significant for me to kind of look at and to go deeper into is the idea that the division and subdivisions of domestic spaces that really divided people, that made them increasingly isolated. Also, in every place, but especially in places like Iran, also protected the possibility of thought and resistance, that the home, and this is true for all of us, right? As public spaces everywhere are shrinking, the home somehow becomes this new public space, a space of interaction with one another, of ideas. I mean, of course, this is in post-colonial thought, this is key, right? The kitchen, the home as spaces of education, of gathering and holding histories, of continuing languages that have been banned in public spaces. So that's my interest in the domestic space, you know, and I go about it in different ways. For example, and I have to say that the kind of work that I was doing with the domestic space really had to change drastically with COVID and lockdown, because I was kind of trying to work with a generation or generations of people in specific parts of the world that were pushed into these actually pretty shitty dwellings, and really kind of excluded from any kind of public realm, and what that meant and what life was like. And then everyone was pushed into their shitty little homes, except for those who had better homes. You can see I come from New York, so housing is huge for me, huge. And so then I really had to think about, this goes back to your question of where is your audience in this? The experiences of my audience expanded, became more uniform with COVID. So I had to rethink the work and revisit. It's a simple answer to a very good and complex question.
One last question.
Hi. Thank you so much. I was just blown away by the work. I'm wondering, you talked about the sort of years-long relationships with the collaborators, and also about, I think you said standing around is a big part of your research. And then the shots in the films are, so long and really meditative. I was wondering if you could talk about sort of the role of time in your work.
Time plays various roles, I think, in all of our works. I mean, one thing that I think about a lot now and these days is how we as artists, there are certain works that you can only make in certain periods of your life. I understand that there's this idea that you figure some trick out early on and you can repeat that for a long time. But, I do wonder that the kind of work for me that kind of developed over a lot of kind of boredom and standing around until someone would finally say something, if I could do that kind of work now. I have done it up to this point, but that changes. So time is something for me that's connected to the subject. It's connected to my own life and life force. And it's also connected to the life of my audience, right? And I think something that's really wonderful to do as artists is to have that dial where you kind of speed things up and slow things down. For example, I don't think this moment in history in the region of the world that I'm mostly engaged with is necessarily a great time for kind of slow work. Things move fast. And so when I say a kind of meticulous and frantic archiving, a lot of the work is frantic. What I don't know is what is the aesthetic of that kind of frantic movement, of that a new kind of joy and fear and threat and a much faster timeline of events unfolding. So one has to figure that out. My relationship to time isn't constant and it's not singular, but I think that having had some training as a sculptor, and really I didn't show many sculptural works, but I think of time very sculpturally, I have to say, and think about how we mold and carve it into being. And we create time as artists. Again, a simple answer to a very complex question. And we're out of time, so thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm up here. To say thank you and to remind you all that the colloquium with Shadi is tomorrow at 5 to 8. So thank you all for coming, for your attention, and all of your great questions. Good night.